First of all, thanks everyone for joining. It's a great showing today. Appreciate everybody and their interest for the coffee break with Greenwald. It's a little bit of a special occasion in that this is the 30th coffee break that we did. Like a lot of people in kind of post-COVID era, we wanted to be more connected with our friends and clients and others in the industry. And we started rolling out these coffee breaks. And if this is the first one that you've attended, if you've attended more than one, really want to extend a thank you for connecting with us and being part of it. Your interest in Greenwald and the research that we do really means a lot to us. Also want to give a special shout out to Quincy Payne, who is really the one who's been spearheading the coffee break series at Greenwald, has been in charge of it from the very beginning. So thanks, Quincy, for making this a success and keeping it going even past the kind of COVID era of webinar interest and that kind of thing. But we're really excited to talk to you today about trends to watch in 2024. So we're showing a number of findings about our Retiree Insights program, kind of interesting stats that we've seen over the course of the year. Also wanting to highlight not just Greenwald stuff, but looking for interesting kind of facts that support why this is important to be tracking, what we should be thinking about. But really leaning into it's January. We want to be looking forward into 2024. What are things that we want to be really aware of that could impact major elements of kind of what we think about as retirement issues, right? Not all of these are about specifically retirement, but they really have a major impact on the topics and ideas that we follow in Retiree Insights, and I think all of us follow in the retirement industry. I'm joined by Sam Cantor, who's going to be presenting some of the trends as well. Yeah, happy to go ahead and get started. So first of all, not everyone on this will be familiar with our Retiree Insights program, so just wanted to give the biggest of high-level summaries of what this is, which is a syndicated study that we've been doing for more than a decade now, that is multi-sponsor and iterative throughout the year. So that means we have different phases of research that we're pulling from, different perspectives. We're talking to pre-retirees, retirees, the financial professionals that serve them, but also kind of thinking about this from survey perspective. What do the data say about these audiences? And then focus groups, when you actually talk to people in real life, how does this actually come across? What are the things that matter to them? How do they interpret these topics and what to do about them? And what we're going to only touch on a few very specific findings today, but just so you know, it's a very broad-reaching program of research. We investigate attitudes about the economic context that we're in. How do retirees, pre-retirees interpret this and kind of approach it? What are their strategies for retirement savings, retirement planning, unexpected expenses in retirement, retirement income, basically the whole bag of things that are relevant to understanding this audience, what they're doing about retirement, and what their strategies are for kind of making their money last throughout retirement. How and when are Americans retiring? How is that shifting? What does it look like? How do kind of trends that we're seeing today kind of change the equation for people? And then lastly, something that we introduced this year, AI and financial advice, which we're not going to talk about on today's coffee break. We talked about it in the fall on a coffee break, and we're going to be hearing a lot about it throughout the year. But I think important to know this is something we're tracking now going forward. It's going to be an element of Retiree Insights and a big picture trend of what we should be really paying attention to.
And if you're interested in some of that stuff, it is up on our website as well as seen through some social media posts on LinkedIn.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say it at the end, but I'll mention it here too. If any of this is of interest to you, if you're interested in potentially sponsoring, please reach out and let us know. We're happy to even just talk about the research and kind of the directions and findings that we've we've seen over the last decade, but also what we're doing in 2024 and what might be of interest to you. So let's jump in to the trends. So really kind of thinking about what's on the horizon for 2024, what we should really be focused on in terms of what impacts retirees, what impacts this audience. Not surprisingly, this kind of the context, the economic context that we're in is a major element of a lot of this. So I'm going to start by talking about the direction of the economy, how people are interpreting that, what that means. Sam's going to talk about the retirement transition, potentially in this return to office scenario that a lot of companies are going to move towards this year and going forward. How does that change what our expectations were for retirement transitions? Political anxiety. This is not the first time that you're going to hear about it this year, and it's definitely not the last. Political anxiety, how it impacts people, is going to be a major feature of all market research this year, and I think something that we really have to pay attention to as an industry that's not political, but it's on the minds of the people that we are surveying, serving, all that kind of stuff. And then lastly, kind of a part two to my first section, which is, can we shake our inflation worries? The direction of the economy and how people see it is really kind of intimately connected to what we think about inflation. And there's a lot to kind of consider as there's big changes on the horizon regarding inflation. And there's actually some late breaking news that we can kind of talk about today related to this and consumer sentiment, which I'm kind of excited to share and talk to you about. So first of all, starting with the direction of the economy. This data from the Retiree Insights tells a really interesting story, and I think focusing on the left is important just as a starting point. So we ask a question about investment outlook. How optimistic, pessimistic, neutral do you feel about the kind of near-term investment outlook? And we've been on a roller coaster over the last couple of years. It's not something Retiree Insights needs to tell you, but it paints a picture really well. In that 2021, 67% optimistic, things look great. Barely anyone saying they feel pessimistic. There's some people in the neutral category, but it's really a story of optimism that then gets just flipped on its head in 2022. Pessimism actually outpacing optimism in kind of a startling way when you compare it to where it was the previous year. And that's a shift in attitudes that you don't typically see in survey research. But it was a major story last year. It's a major kind of attitude and feeling that this audience, but Americans in general, were kind of weighed down by. This year, things have changed, right? Optimism is back. It's rebounded definitely from 2022. Not quite where things were in 2021, but you can definitely see the trajectory, right? That people are in a way different mindset than they were just 1 year ago, when kind of the feelings of seeing your retirement account go down significantly really kind of impacted people's perception of where they were going, how they felt about investing. All that feels like a positive, but it's in the context of what we see also on the right here, which is that we asked also about, compared to last year, do you believe the economy is heading right direction, wrong direction? Is it not a change from kind of where things were? And despite what we see on the left, right, this optimistic story, half believe the economy is heading in the wrong direction. It's kind of a major number, given that only 18% feel pessimistic about investing. 50% feel pessimistic about the direction of the broader economy. And it's even more interesting when you compare it to what financial professionals say, in which basically the reverse is true. 50% or so say that things are going in the right direction. So it's kind of a mirror image of what consumers are telling us they feel about the overall direction of the economy. One thing that could be comforting, it's probably not that comforting, but we're not alone in this. You can see on the left Ipsos data about the direction your country's heading. That's very different from where the economy's heading in kind of concept, but these things hang together very closely. So it's a good bellwether for kind of how people feel about the overall direction of big features like the economy. You can see, unless you're in basically Southeast Asia, the world feels pessimistic about the direction things are going. US is kind of right in the middle there, 67% kind of wrong track in terms of the direction that we're heading. And also on the right, kind of confirming, but giving a little bit more of a trend line to kind of big picture direction of where people see the economy going, getting better, getting worse. This is from Gallup's, I think, monthly phone poll. In any event, kind of their regular poll that they are kind of keeping track of political economic attitudes. You can see at the very left of the chart in 2020, pandemic hits, all of a sudden the narrative flips, things are getting worse. Everyone is kind of worried about where the economy's heading, how employment is going to recover. The stock market recovers very quick, but people's attitudes about it don't recover quite as quick. But in 2021, the story's more positive. It's not quite the positivity of things getting better being more common, but it's at least 50-50. And then we head into 2022 and things get entrenched, right? We have this kind of entrenched negativity about the overall direction of the economy, even as the market has gotten better, even as inflation kind of technically is better than 2022. That doesn't necessarily mean people feel it that way. And things have not really moved. It's kind of bounced around a little bit, but it has not really moved over the last couple of years. So just a couple quick implications questions. Will consumer beliefs about the direction of the economy dampen how they respond to a more positive market context? In 2021, inflation and a downturn in the market kind of doubled the feeling, the pain that people were feeling about all of that. Does now a kind of positive market direction get dampened by negative feelings about inflation and the general economy? Second, why is there this disconnect between consumers and financial professionals? I think this is a really interesting thing that we need to try and grapple with. Financial professionals also, I think, stand for the industry, whereas we see things as kind of different from how it really feels to consumers and how it impacts their life. Why is that disconnect there? What do we make of it? How do we change that or address it? And then lastly, is this a difference of short-term versus long-term outlook? What would that imply for the help pre-retirees and retirees need? What products kind of address this kind of concern? What planning help? What advice kind of helps address these different feelings of positivity on one hand, but negativity in the long term or the big picture? So a lot of kind of reasons to really be understanding this trend in 2024. But as I said, inflation's a major part of this, and I'll get to it in a minute after we hear from Sam about a couple of other trends to watch for in 2024.
So retirement transition versus the return to office. We've thought a lot about work from home in the terms of work and people working, but it has large implications on retirement and pre-retirees' plans for leaving the workforce. As you can see on the two graphs to the left, 6 and 10 say that the ability to work from home makes them more likely to postpone retirement, as well as more likely to transition gradually into retirement. So working from home is letting them work a little bit longer, and yet we don't know if work from home is definite, and we can see if there is a shift that 34% say that a return to office policy would make them more likely to retire earlier. So the work from home and the return to office, this isn't just hypothetical. Return to office policies are likely to rise in 2024, according to the survey of business leaders by Resume Builder. over 1,000 employers, 90% of companies plan to implement return to office policies by the end of 2024. That does not mean 5 days a week in office, but at least some hybrid version of it. Amazon CEO said it's easier to learn, model, practice, and strengthen your culture. So they are pushing for a return to office to really build company morale. Despite the benefits that have been seen for employees, only 2% of business leaders said their company never plans to require to work in person. So there's a huge push for the return to office. Some implications of this: 75% of pre-retirees want to retire gradually, but as we saw in Retiree Insights, only a quarter of retirees say that has been the case for them. Will work from home change this in the long term for companies? And then will return to work be implemented as aggressively as predicted, with 90% of companies trying to implement a policy? Will those near retirement feel differently if it's partial return to work, where it's not the 5 days, but it is a hybrid? And ultimately, we are left wondering, how will pre-retirees actually respond to this news? Next, we're going to go and talk about the political anxiety that a lot of consumers are feeling entering 2024. As seen again in Retiree Insights, politics ranks highest amongst consumer worries. 83% of consumers said they are worried about the current political environment, but that doesn't really emphasize how far ahead it is compared to other worries, as politics is 10 points higher of the level of inflation consumers are worried about, 14 points higher than the possibility of an economic recession, and even 23 points higher than developing a serious health condition. In focus groups, advisors saw this worry, and one financial professional said, yeah, anybody that is interested in or follows politics, either side of the table on it, 1,000,000% concerned about what is going on. They're both completely petrified about what is going to happen to the country, and come up with the most weird questions and stuff like that. It drives me nuts. I absolutely hate the political conversation, can't stand it. The other side of this is financial professionals. They're not comfortable with this conversation, as we saw, and it's hard to kind of make the rationale between someone's finances and these crazy, as he was saying, weird questions that they receive. So politics, it's always anxiety inducing, but why is 2024 noteworthy or important? 50 nations, or over 50 nations, will be holding an election in 2024, with at least half the population of the world set to vote. And that can really change a lot of political stuff within the world as well as everywhere. Just honing in on the US, there's a sense that there's a huge stake on this election, and that a lot of people perceive it as to be life or death, as 6 in 10 Americans say democracy could be at risk depending on who wins. That's a large jump, and it is seen with social media that it kind of riles up people. As a Johns Hopkins professor said, social media platforms and news sites that reinforce biases accelerate the polarization that leads people from different political perspectives to believe the other side is the one representing the grave threat to the nation's democracy. So with a real focus on social media nowadays, even more than in 2020, you can see that it's really polarizing people, and there's a lot of anxiety going into this huge election. Some implications that we've seen and some questions that we have are there are real economic and retirement related policy implications that could emerge from the 2024 election. For example, Social Security is a huge issue, and pre-retirees are extremely worried and anxious about if they're going to be able to get it and what's it going to be moving forward. Consumers are increasingly worried that not just about politics as they have been, but particularly the volatility and unpredictable version of politics. So it's not really who's going to win, but there's a lot of this, as seen with the social media bias and polarization. And then three, an even bigger issue, financial professionals are often not comfortable addressing politics with clients. So we're wondering what's the right way to engage this topic.
Thanks, Sam. Now, going to round it out with kind of the topic of inflation. And as I said, really part two of the big picture direction of the economy issue. And so starting with how people feel about inflation and what the impact actually is. So you can see from Retiree Insights, 50% say they've cut back on discretionary spending as a result of specifically inflation, not just as kind of a desire to be frugal, but as a reaction to inflation, people are cutting spending. More kind of importantly, 24% cutting back on essential spending, which of course is partly due to their definition of what's essential and not, but we've even heard in focus groups, people wanting to, when they're running errands, be more direct about kind of tackling multiple errands all in one trip. I don't want to spend as much on gas. There's kind of a big emphasis to kind of be able to address what they see as kind of a big impediment to their money lasting them. How can they address it with spending? A lot of people are doing that. It's also the case that inflation is on the downward trend as a worry, which is nice, down from 79% to 72%. But that's not too far down from in comparison to where things have been, right? That's just down from last year. And it's also the case that this still ranks as the number 2 worry that people have overall. Even if politics kind of takes the number 1 spot, inflation is still very present in people's minds, even when things kind of improve with kind of the literal CPI inflation that we are kind of measuring and tracking as an industry and as people monitoring it do. It's also the case that people who don't feel confident in their ability to live comfortably in retirement in large part blame inflation. So on the right, this is from our retirement confidence survey. What's number 1 among retirees as the reason they don't feel confident? Inflation by a large margin. 42% say that's the reason. Only 25% say it's because they don't have enough savings, right? That's kind of a very informative difference there. These two things are very linked, how much your money is going to last. And yet it's the inflation that they feel like is kind of causing the problem. Not that they didn't save enough, but that inflation is kind of hurting the ability of that money to last them. It's also the case that we're actually responding to inflation more strongly than economists would predict. So this is a complicated chart. This is from the Wall Street Journal, and it's measuring the consumer sentiment index that the University of Michigan tracks versus what they call the economic misery index, which is basically a way of saying the things that impact us the most, the things that we feel the most, inflation and unemployment. If you map those two together, it gives us this kind of index that typically drives a lot of consumer sentiment about the economy. And in red are the years from 2023 versus kind of where all the kind of correlations have been over the course of the last, 30, 40 years. It's kind of a cloud of data, but you see a trend of kind of where people expect consumer sentiment to be versus how bad unemployment, how bad inflation is kind of impacting things. And what the red dots tell you is that consumer sentiment is way lower than we would expect to see based on the levels that these two things contribute towards. So not only is inflation kind of objectively bad, but subjectively, we're feeling it way stronger than we ever have in the past. Now, the good thing is that inflation, as probably a lot of us have been following, is projected to go down quite a bit in 2024, where the goal is 2.4%. The kind of target of 2% is expected to be reached by 2026. But things are going to improve this year, right? Inflation is going to come down. It's going to get more in the range of what we typically feel is okay to be dealing with. And if you look at kind of what contributes to the inflation that we're seeing today, a lot of the kind of pain points that people react to strongest, food, services, energy, goods, all of these things are kind of tracking downwards. Housing is really the thing that is keeping inflation as high as it really is. And even that people are expecting to ease in 2024 to allow the number to get down closer to 2%. So things are going to get better. But the question is, will people actually feel that improvement? Because the tricky thing about inflation is that decreasing inflation, so disinflation, does not mean deflation where prices go down, right? So we're not going to necessarily see the price of the things that we watch at the grocery store, when we're buying plane tickets or gas at the gas tank. Those don't necessarily go down just because inflation gets under control. It just means that it's growing, it's increasing at a more reasonable rate. So what does actually impact people? Do people follow what the overall inflation rate is? Or do people kind of look back and think, what is a reasonable price for this gallon of milk? Or what's a reasonable price for ground beef, as you can see charted on the right, which has not necessarily gone down, right? It's steadily increasing. And that's what I think we'd expect through 2024 as well. Now, the positive news that I wanted to highlight just before we go is that literally an hour ago, University of Michigan released the consumer sentiment data, and it has really bounced back in a major way, more than people were expecting. It increased in December, but it really spiked again in January. So the positivity of kind of where things are going, kind of expectations of housing, feelings of kind of positive news coverage, really driving potentially a new direction for January and a new direction for 2024. So I'll end with just some last thoughts about this. First, that there's real financial security and perceived financial security, right? Inflation has a real impact on the financial security of retirees, and it's something that we need to be worried about, understand. But there's also an impact on perceived financial security that's also important. It changes how people react to the economy. It changes how people kind of make choices about spending and saving. Will inflation worries go down if the cost of key items does not decrease? I think I'd be a little skeptical that people really follow the news that carefully. And yet, we see today that this kind of major increase in consumer sentiment seems to be kind of tracking with a change in narrative in the media about inflation and where it's going to go in 2024. And then lastly, kind of dovetailing on stuff that we talked about in the first section, worry about inflation is a major driver of worry about running out of money in retirement. How do pre-retirees and retirees react to inflation, to decreasing inflation? What is it going to look like in 2024? I think this, as well as politics, kind of the changing return to office trends, how that impacts actual retirement decisions, all this stuff is important trends. We're really eager to kind of see what it looks like in this year's Retiree Insights. And again, want to thank everybody for joining to kind of hear what we are looking at in 2024 and beyond. Happy to entertain questions, comments if people can stay. But otherwise, appreciate you joining and being a part of this. Any questions? can help with and see any chats. Okay, well, I'll throw up the information. You can obviously find us on both LinkedIn and our website. Feel free to reach out to me directly if you're interested in retiree insights. You can also see some of our previous coffee break videos through our website and on YouTube. But again, thanks for joining. Hope everyone has a good rest of your day and a great weekend.